Luke Carter, a former Navy SEAL living alone in a weathered cabin deep in the Appalachian Mountains, wanted nothing more than silence after losing the only family he had left. But on a cold, rain-soaked night, something moved beyond his door. When Luke opened it, a trembling German shepherd stood on her hind legs. 3 tiny, golden puppies pressed against her, barely holding on. She wasn't their mother, but she refused to leave them. He didn't know it yet, but that moment would change everything. Welcome to K9 of Courage. Subscribe so you don't miss the next story. But before anything begins, before a single choice is made, tell me, where are you watching from today? Tonight we follow a man who thought his life had gone quiet for good, until something unexpected arrived at his door, asking for help. Near midnight, the rain came down in long, slanted lines across the Appalachian Ridge, tapping against the old wooden cabin as if the mountain itself were trying to be heard. Inside, Luke Carter moved quietly between shadows and firelight. At 38, the former Navy SEAL carried a stillness that didn't come from peace, but from things long buried. His frame was broad, his posture instinctively alert, though no one had called his name in years. A short beard traced his jaw, uneven like the life he had stopped trying to fix. He lived alone now, and the silence had settled into him like a second skin. The fire cracked softly. Rain whispered against the glass. It was the kind of night where the world felt far away, exactly how Luke preferred it. Then came the sound. Not a knock. Not quite. A faint scrape, followed by something softer. A fragile, desperate whine. Luke froze, head tilted slightly, listening the way he once had in darker places. The sound came again, barely there beneath the rain. He stood, slow and deliberate, and reached for the door. Cold air rushed in the moment it opened. For a second, there was nothing but darkness and rain. Then she stepped forward. A German shepherd, about 5 years old, her coat soaked through, clinging to her lean frame. Mud streaked her legs and her breath came uneven, like each inhale had to be earned. One ear dipped slightly, as if it had healed wrong long ago, but it was her eyes that stopped him. Amber, steady, carrying something far older than fear. She rose onto her hind legs, one paw lifted, trembling in the air. Reaching. Luke didn't move, not because he didn't understand, because he did. At her feet, pressed close against her body, were 3 golden retriever puppies, no more than a few weeks old. One pale cream, one soft honey, one a deeper red. Their small bodies shook uncontrollably, their breaths thin, their eyes barely open to the world they had not yet learned to survive. The shepherd didn't look at them. She looked at him, as if she had already made her choice. Luke felt something shift, quiet, unwelcome, and undeniable. For a long time he had trained himself not to feel that pull. Not again. Not after everything that had already been taken. But the paw stayed there, still reaching. "Yeah," he exhaled, voice low, rough from disuse. "I see you." He stepped aside. That was all it took. The shepherd didn't rush. She moved forward slowly, carefully, guiding the puppies with her body as they stumbled across the threshold. One of them slipped, too weak to stand, and she nudged it gently until it found its footing again. Only when all 3 were inside did she finally lower herself to the floor. Luke closed the door behind them. The storm remained outside, but something else had crossed in with them. He crouched near the fire, reaching for an old blanket. The puppies barely reacted as he wrapped them, their small bodies cold as river stones. One gave a faint whimper. Another tried to lift its head and failed. The shepherd watched him the entire time, not tense, not afraid, just waiting. "Not yours," Luke murmured, more to himself than to her. There was no milk, no scent of it. And yet she stayed close, shifting her body so the puppies leaned against her warmth. He hesitated for a moment. Then he reached out and rested his hand lightly against her neck. She didn't flinch. Outside, the rain continued its endless fall. Inside, the fire grew stronger, shadows pulling back inch by inch. Luke sat there longer than he meant to, watching the slow rise and fall of 3 fragile chests and the quiet, unyielding presence of the dog who had brought them here. For the first time in years, the silence in the cabin didn't feel empty. It felt interrupted. And somehow that was worse. Or maybe, just maybe, it was the beginning of something he wasn't ready to name. By morning, something felt off. Why would a mother protect puppies that weren't her own? And if she wasn't their mother, then who was? Let's follow Luke as he begins to uncover the truth. Morning arrived quietly. The rain reduced to a soft, persistent drip from the cabin roof. Luke woke in the chair, neck stiff, boots still on, the fire reduced to a low orange glow. For a moment, he didn't move. The room felt different. Not louder, not brighter, just occupied in a way he hadn't allowed for a long time. Then came a small sound, a weak, uneven whimper. He leaned forward instantly. The 3 puppies were still alive, but barely. One shifted in place, its tiny body trembling as if the cold had not fully let go. Another lay too still, its breathing shallow enough to make Luke's chest tighten. He reached for them without thinking, wrapping them closer to the warmth, adjusting the blanket, checking each one the way his hands remembered before his mind caught up. Behind him, the shepherd watched. Not hovering, not restless, just present. Luke glanced at her, then back at the puppies. Something wasn't right. He frowned, watching the way they nudged against her, searching, instinct pulling them toward something that wasn't there. He understood it in a quiet, heavy moment. "No milk," he murmured. The realization settled slowly, like something he didn't want to accept but couldn't ignore. These weren't hers, not by blood, not by nature. And yet she hadn't left them. Not in the storm, not when it would have been easier. He sat back, exhaling through his nose. "So why you?" The shepherd didn't answer. She simply lowered herself beside them again, careful, deliberate, adjusting her body so the smallest one leaned into her chest. When it stirred, she nudged it closer, her movements gentle but certain, like she had made this decision long before she ever reached his door. Luke rubbed his face, the weight of it pressing somewhere deeper than he expected. He had spent years believing that loss drew a line, clear, final. That what was gone stayed gone, and what remained learned to live around the absence. But this didn't follow that rule. He stood and moved toward the small shelf near the stove, pulling down what little he had left. Powdered milk, an old bottle, something close enough to keep them going. His hands worked steadily, even as his thoughts drifted somewhere uncomfortable. "They're not yours," he said again, quieter now. The shepherd lifted her head, and for a brief second something passed between them, not understanding in words, but something closer to recognition. "It doesn't matter." Luke looked away first. He fed the smallest one carefully, supporting its head, watching for any sign of strength. The others followed, weak but willing. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep them here for now. Time passed without notice. The fire was rebuilt. The room warmed. The storm faded further into the background. Only when he reached to adjust the blanket did he notice it. A corner of fabric tucked beneath the smallest pup, different from the rest, cleaner, intentional. He pulled it free gently. A faded piece of cloth, worn but not old, wrapped once, twice, like someone had tried to keep something safe. Inside, barely visible, was a thin strip of plastic, a tag. Luke turned it toward the light. The letters were smudged, but still readable. A name, a place, not far from the mountain. He stared at it longer than he meant to, something tightening in his chest. Not fear, not anger, something sharper, a question that refused to stay quiet. He looked back at the shepherd. She was already watching him. Not waiting this time. Knowing. And in that moment, Luke understood something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. This wasn't over. It hadn't ended at his door. It had only just begun. What that dog had done in the storm was already incredible, but what Luke was about to discover would raise a darker question. What kind of world forces a creature to risk everything just to save the forgotten? Let's continue as he searches for answers. Luke didn't wait for the day to settle. By late morning, he had the truck running, the paper tag folded carefully in his pocket. The road down the mountain was still slick, the kind that demanded attention, but his mind wasn't on the turns. It stayed on the name printed on that small piece of plastic, and on the quiet certainty in the dog's eyes when he had looked back at her. She knew where this led. The puppies slept in a lined crate beside her, their breathing uneven but steadier than before. Every time the truck shifted, she adjusted her position, pressing closer, keeping them from rolling. Luke noticed it without meaning to. He noticed everything now. The place on the tag sat at the edge of a narrow valley, half hidden behind a line of fencing that had long since given up pretending to keep anything in, or out. A weather-beaten sign hung crooked near the entrance, its letters barely legible. Luke parked but didn't step out right away. Something about the stillness felt wrong. Not quiet, empty. "You stay," he said softly, though he knew she wouldn't move anyway. The gravel crunched under his boots as he approached. No sound came from the buildings. No barking. No movement. Just a cold, stale silence that pressed against the air. Then he saw the first cage. It wasn't broken. It had been left. Inside, a metal bowl tipped on its side, dry. Luke's jaw tightened. "Hello?" His voice carried, but nothing answered. He moved further in. Another pen. Another. Each one told the same story. Neglect without urgency, abandonment without guilt. This hadn't been a place of care. It had been a place of use. A soft voice came from behind him. "You shouldn't be here alone." Luke turned. A woman stood a few steps back holding a clipboard against her chest. Mid-40s, practical jacket, her hair pulled back in a way that suggested she didn't have time for anything unnecessary. Her eyes moved quickly, taking in the scene, then settling on Luke. "I'm Dr. Emily Harper," she said. "County vet. We got a call this morning." Luke nodded once. "I was already on my way." Before she could respond, another vehicle pulled in behind them. A sheriff stepped out, older, steady in his movements, the kind of presence that didn't need to raise its voice to be heard. "Name's Sheriff Dale Brooks," he said as he approached. "Looks like we're all here for the same reason." Luke didn't answer. He was already moving again. It didn't take long. Behind the main structure, they found it. A smaller enclosure. Locked. Inside, beneath a tarp that had been carelessly thrown over something that didn't need hiding, just forgetting, was the body of a golden retriever. Still, unmoved, the kind of stillness that didn't leave room for hope. Emily stepped forward slowly, her voice quieter now. She didn't make it. Luke didn't move closer. He didn't need to. He already knew. Behind him, the truck door clicked. He turned just in time to see the shepherd step down. Silent. Deliberate. She didn't hesitate. She walked past him, past the others, straight to the enclosure. Then she stopped. No sound, no movement, just presence. Emily watched, her expression shifting. She knew. Luke swallowed, something tightening in his chest. Not anger, not yet. Something heavier, something that didn't shout. "She brought them out," he said. "Before this." The sheriff nodded slowly. "Then she saved them." The word stayed in the air. Saved. Luke looked at the small enclosure again, at what had been left behind, at what had been carried through a storm no one else had answered. For a moment he expected the anger to come. It didn't. What came instead was something quieter, something that settled deeper than rage ever could. a decision. "They're not going back," Luke said. No one argued. The sheriff pulled out his radio, already calling it in. Emily stepped forward to document everything, her hands steady despite what lay in front of her. The shepherd turned and walked back toward the truck. Not slowly this time. Purposefully. The puppies stirred as she approached, one letting out a weak sound as if sensing her return. She lowered herself beside them immediately, pressing close as if confirming something only she understood. Luke stood there a moment longer. Then he followed. Whatever this place had been, it wasn't theirs anymore, and whatever came next, he was already part of it. The storm had passed, but not everything it carried was gone. Sometimes what arrives in the cold doesn't leave with it. Let's keep going and see how this one moment begins to change everything. Luke didn't speak much on the drive back. The road wound upward through damp earth and thinning fog. The world quieter now, but not the same. The weight he carried wasn't the kind that pressed down. It was the kind that settled in and stayed. Behind him, the puppies shifted, their small sounds no longer fragile, but searching. The shepherd rested close, adjusting each time they stirred, never fully still. When the cabin came into view, something in Luke hesitated. Not doubt, recognition. He stepped inside first, setting things in place without thinking. Fire, water, space cleared near the stove. The routine returned easily, but it didn't feel like routine anymore. It felt necessary. By evening, the room had changed, not in how it looked, but in how it moved. One of the puppies found its way out of the blanket first, clumsy, determined. It stumbled across the wooden floor, paused, then kept going as if the world had already decided it belonged here. Another followed, less steady but no less certain. The third stayed closer, pressing against the shepherd's side until she nudged it forward gently but firmly. Luke watched from the chair, arms resting on his knees. "They don't waste time," he muttered. The shepherd didn't look at him. She was watching them. Days passed in small, unnoticed shifts. The mornings came earlier, not because of light, but because something needed feeding, cleaning, guiding. The silence that once filled the cabin no longer had room to settle. It broke apart in small bursts, scratching paws, soft whines, the uneven rhythm of life finding its way back. Luke found himself adjusting. He moved things without thinking. A chair pushed aside, a blanket folded lower, water always ready. His steps slowed, not out of caution but awareness. He noticed where they walked, where they paused, what drew their attention, and without realizing it, he started speaking. "Not there," he said one morning as one of them chewed at the corner of the rug. It stopped, looked at him, then, slowly, turned away. Luke blinked. "Well, I'll be." The shepherd lay nearby, eyes half closed, but listening. He noticed something else, too. She wasn't just watching them anymore. She was watching him, measuring, deciding. One afternoon, as rain tapped lightly against the window again, Luke sat near the door, a worn piece of wood in his hands. He hadn't carved anything in years. Not since before everything had gone quiet. The first cut was rough, the second steadier. By the time the fire burned low, the shape had taken form. Simple, uneven, but clear. A sign. He didn't hang it yet, just set it beside the door. The shepherd stood and walked over, pausing beside him. Not asking, not waiting. Just there. Luke rested his hand against her shoulder, firm this time. "You didn't have to bring them," he said quietly. She didn't move. "But you did." Outside, the last of the rain faded into stillness. Inside, something else had taken its place. Not noise, not chaos. Something steadier. Something that didn't disappear when the night came. Luke looked around the room. The scattered blankets, the small movements, the life that had settled in without asking permission. For a long time he had believed that what was lost left a space nothing could fill. Now, he wasn't so sure. He reached for the sign again, running his thumb along the carved edge. Then he nodded once to himself. They stay. The decision didn't echo. It didn't need to. The cabin had already answered. There are moments in life that arrive quietly. Not with thunder, not with certainty, but with a small knock we almost ignore. And yet, those are often the moments where grace is waiting. A man who had closed his door to the world opened it just once. A dog who had no reason to stay chose to carry what wasn't hers. And in that meeting, something unseen began to move. Something no storm could take away. Not luck, not coincidence, but something deeper. The kind of mercy many would call a quiet work of God. Perhaps that's how miracles really come. Not as something grand, but as a choice placed gently in our hands. A chance to care, a chance to stay, a chance to become the answer to someone else's need. And maybe tonight, after hearing this story, there's a small moment waiting in your own life. A neighbor who could use a kind word, a memory that deserves to be held with more softness, or simply a heart that could open just a little to something good again. If this story meant something to you, feel free to share it with someone who might need it too. I'd love to hear where you're listening from, or what part stayed with you the most. And if you'd like to walk with more stories like this, you're always welcome here. May God watch over your home, bring peace to your heart, and guide your steps gently, especially on the days that feel the quietest.